All right, welcome back to Waste Some Time with Jason Green. I am Jason Green, bringing you brand new interviews right here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. And if you want to ask questions of my guests, go to the Patreon link in the description, click on that, pick the appropriate tier, and you will be asking the next questions. And also, you'll get to see the interviews before anybody else. Joining me today is David Reece. David Reece, you may know his work from Accept, Bonfire, Bangalore Choir. He has a brand new album out. It's out right now, Blacklist Utopia. You've got to check this out. We're going to talk to David about that and much more right after this. All right, joining us all the way from Italy, David Reece.
Hey, greetings. Buonasera.
Yeah, David, I mean, we should just start with, how did you end up in Italy?
A woman. Yeah, kind of a cliche story, but we had met 2014, and I was kind of still doing the bonfire thing, and I thought, what better way to test a woman than to stick her on a touring schedule and see how she handles my life. And I think we did about 30 shows, 3 separate trips, and each time it was like, yeah, this is the one. And December 14th, December 4th, 2014, I moved to Italy, finished a tour in Europe, and came over here.
Yeah, it's and it seems fitting though. European countries, especially, are still very passionate about heavy metal music.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where if they latch onto you, it's a lifelong thing. It's not like America, like here today, gone later today. It's not I mean, you see guys wearing patches since they were 8 years old. You know, the same band. If they're still playing, they're going to see them live. You know.
And I feel that some of the heavier bands survived a little better. Some of the other bands got lumped into a scene and maybe put aside. But it's like, again, and especially in the European countries, heavy metal music really has survived. And so here in America, not everyone is familiar with your releases. Since 2009, you've been putting out solo records, but you've been parts of so many bands. And I want to make sure that people know that Blacklist Utopia is out right now. The link is in the description. You can go out, order it, listen to it, and see that you're still making a really great metal music that I think people will love. And so obviously you're here to spread the word about that.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to go back to like what you said, the beginning and how we got to this point? Or
yeah, so if we can do that, I'd like to go back. And I always find it interesting, especially with someone who has such a strong voice like yourself. How do you realize that you have that voice? Is it are you taught at some point? I know you grew up in Oklahoma, moved to Minnesota. Yeah. So you tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, you know, I moved to Minnesota because the family, dad ran out of work and he went searching, and he ended up at 3M, the elementary school that I attended. I'd walk down the hall and hear him singing in choir, and one day I just stuck my head in and walked up and started singing along. And the teacher, I remember her name, Mrs. Harnick, and she was just staring at me. And then after class, sat me down, and she played "Yesterday" by the Beatles, by McCartney. And I knew the words, and I sang it, and she says, "You have a gift." And I started doing that, and I was about 8 years old. And after school, I would get beat up because it wasn't cool to be a dude in choir in those days. So I quit, and teacher would come, beg my mom to get me, and I'd hide, and because it was frightening. You get your ass kicked every day because it was considered kind of a sissy thing to do. But I knew then, it's what I liked. And I always had my eyes on my posters, Ozzy and Robert Plant, and even Yes, and those bands like that. I mean, it was just magic to me, lead singers, Paul Rogers and those guys. And then you kind of morph into doing a couple of barn dances and doing that thing. And then you get into the clubs and you play the worst ones available, and then you move up. And that was in Minnesota. I mean, in those days, you could play like a lot of guys, the old grandpas like me. You're playing 7 nights a week, 4 or 5 hours a night. 5 sets, and you covered a lot of lot of material. You went from, Sweet Home Alabama to, the early pre-stuff in your set just to get paid, right? So I realized I had the strength in it, but I took a lot of vocal classes knowing that I needed to figure out how to sing properly, because that's brutal, that schedule, And, all the other little sweet things that go along with that period of our time, this late 70s, early 80s, the marching powder and all that stuff. You beat yourself up pretty good. I've been lucky because I did the training. I did all the dope. I did all the whole rock star thing. And then I somehow rose above it and walked away from it and got sober. And yeah, and that's how it ended up. I literally had been in LA for about a year and did some demo tapes of Mitch Perry, who was in Tellus with Billy Sheehan. And he, of course, went on to work with Michael Schenker and a million other guys. And we demoed a bunch of stuff. And I was kind of homeless living at this lady's house on her floor. And Dieter Dirks, producer of the Scorpions, came to LA and was kind of seeing her on the side and said, "Hey, I need a singer for Accept. And I can't find the right guy." And I had just split and gone to Colorado because my family had moved there, and left that cassette that Mitch and I did in the studio. And she goes, "Well, check this guy out." And she put it in and he goes, "That's the guy. Where is he?" And they found me. And I got a phone call from Wolf Hoffman in the middle of the night. And I thought it was, I said, "Yeah, I'm Mickey Mouse. This isn't Wolf Hoffman. What do you want?"
Right.
And he called me back. I hung up on him because I thought it was a joke. And a couple of weeks later, I was on a plane to Dusseldorf. So that is why I'm talking to you, because I ended up being the singer of Accept. And that was no easy chart. I mean, that was
not at all. This is 1988 we're talking about.
Yeah.
And obviously Udo Dirkschneider was loved by those fans. And
it is.
Yeah, it still is, of course.
Yeah.
And so big shoes, small guy, but big shoes to fill. And you brought something different to the band, and maybe people weren't ready to accept something different. Do you think that they were looking to maybe commercialize a little bit and to try to fit in?
Yeah, I mean, they peaked out about 400,000 units with Balls, and the labels were all starting to get a little, "Hey, man, this, Udo's voice isn't really geared for American radio." I mean, he's the German Panzer in Europe, and there was a huge market for him there, but they were coaxed into it. We're getting close to gold, but if you really want this thing to work, we got to cross over the pond and break a platinum or double platinum record. Let's get an American guy or an English guy or whatever, and change the image a little bit. And I think it was so extreme that it frightened the fans. You went from songs like Ecstasy and D-Train and like that to then Prisoner and Mistreated. That was so, the spectrum was so wide. It was shocking to the true Accept purists.
Yeah.
So they leaned on Udo. But I can only say about Udo, we're friends to this day. I mean, I did the Steel Factory tour 2 years ago.
Yeah, you toured together, which is great.
Yeah, but it wasn't, and it's funny about Eat the Heat. That album is an album that is grown to be loved by people more the older it is. Yes. I mean, on the tour that I did with Udo, I mean, I signed that thing a blue million times, and they did a reissue during that tour, which kind of happily coincided with the tour. And I would see it really every show. And people would say, "I hated your guts. I really wanted to hate you, but this has grown on me." So that's kind of cool. It put open doors for me. It was a serious challenge to learn out. And you're doing cover songs for years. And if you can do that and sound like Halford and Dio and all those guys, cool. But who are you as a singer? And what defines you? And that was the words that Dieter Dirk said to me during production. "You got a great range, great powerful voice, but you don't know who you are, and neither do I, and it's my job to find out." So I'm grateful for that.
What recording in Dieter's studio, this is where all those original Scorpions all the great Scorpions records are made. This must have been a great experience for you to step in and be doing this.
I mean, to show you how green and fanboy that I am, they were doing Savage Amusement when I started. Wow. And the night I got there, I mean, I couldn't sleep. I mean, I had jet lag. I'd never flown overseas. And so I went for a run. I got lost, and then I got up at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 with Baltus beating on my door, going, "Come on, let's go." I said, "Well, where are we going?" I just fell asleep. He goes, "To the studio." I'm like, "Oh, cool! I get to meet the Scorpions." And I literally walked in the door, and there's Rudolph and Dieter. I think they were having kind of an argument, and I said, "Hi, I'm David Reece," and they just looked at me like, get out of my face, poser." I mean, and it was weird. It was like, "Go on," and they drugged me downstairs, Peter, and we went right to work. It was very German. That's how they are. It's like, okay, this is the idea. Here's this 58. Start singing something, and I'm like, dude, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah, fall in line.
Yeah, fall in line, man. It's 10 hut. Let's rock and roll. And then they had about 25 tracks that they were kind of fooling with, but some had titles, some didn't. And what I do is sing all day, and then the band would one by one come in and listen and kind of go, that's cool, that's not cool, and let's see how he sings this and what. So it was about a 6-week evolution of trial and error. And then we went into pre-production, and then they booked a live show in Cologne and advertised it as Germany's biggest metal band. And everybody knew that Udo was out and they had a new guy. So I was terrified because I knew if I didn't pass that final inspection, they were going to pack the Jeep and put it on the bottom of a plane and ship me home. And I think Dickinson came there to kind of give his opinion because he was the fencing instructor for the Bonn Olympic team. He showed up to kind of lean over to Gabby and say, "Yeah, he's pretty good." We had about 1,000 kids going crazy. So I decided, okay, I'm going to give it my best. I'll just be on a plane tomorrow. And it was a great experience. But the next morning I woke up and welcome to accept.
Yeah, it's definitely amazing how the world can change for
it's weird.
For a young rock singer just like that.
Yeah.
Early '89, the record comes out, and you guys go on tour for it. You first do club shows, but then you go out on a package. Tell me a little bit about that tour.
The package?
Yeah.
The package was Metal Church and Wasp.
Mm-hmm.
Metal Church first, us second, and Wasp. It was kind of a cruddy tour. But at the time they were doing Headless Children, I think, and that wasn't really grabbing people. Metal Church were actually doing better than the other us. And we went from pretty large rooms to it started to dwindle. And being an American and being in a European band, there's a lot of cultural differences, and that the record wasn't really going as well, and everybody was freaking out. There was a lot of stress, so it kind of escalated and ended in a bad way in Chicago. But
is it true that you and Peter got into a bit of a fight before a show?
After I got drunk and I slapped him. I mean, I'd had enough, and I regret it. He regrets it. We've kind of slowly grown back into our friendship. I reached back out to his wife first, and it's cool now. But it was a dumb thing. I mean, we weren't getting along, and they weren't. I mean, it was a big step, because they could go tour Europe and sell 5,000 seats, 10,000 seats with Udo, and nobody was really grabbing a hold of it. I had the Americans were really digging it as long as we played balls to the wall and, Princess of the Dawn stuff. But the Europeans were it was a real slow crawler, and that pressure and all of the other pressures, and the show tickets weren't selling with Wasp. And it was a combination. It was kind of a boiling point. And it ain't a new story that a rock and roll band gets into a fight, but I regret it. But I was a young kid. I thought I was God in many ways. And
you were young for sure, and thrown into a scene that also becomes a stress. You got pressure on you. Now you're traveling, and it's not doing that well. I know at one point Ken Mary came in and played drums. You had another American in there. He's been on the show also.
And dude learned the set in one day. That day in the hotel room, and played that night and played it perfect.
Oh yeah, well he's great.
I mean, just saw him a couple years ago with Flotsam in Italy at a festival we played. And I go, dude, how's it going? Because he was there doing he could feel all the vibes in the band. Because Benelli came out and checked, I think it was Ron Donnelly. He flew out to kind of feel it out because Stefan's back was really getting bad. And I don't know if that's actually that true, but he wanted out. But Ron Donnelly goes, "Hey, man, really dig you guys, but there's something not working quite right. And I've been through the rainbow thing. I don't need any more of this. I'm going back to New York." Then Ken showed up, and he sat in a hotel room with pads and learned the live set and literally played it the first night. And it was like, wow. And he had the endings, everything. So
Yeah, it's a pretty big to step in just
Yeah.
like that and
Yeah.
play
He's
that.
great. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, after that fight, people went their separate way. They put out a live video from the earlier years later, and eventually Udo would come back,
Yeah.
uh, and your career would continue. Now, obviously, I want to talk mostly about the new record, but
Okay.
so I'll jump around in a few spots. But I got to say, I mean, I knew the Eat the Heat record a little bit. MTV was talking about it, was in the magazines, but Bangalore Choir. Your guitar player Kurt Mitchell, he had a
Uh-huh.
series of guitar tapes, instructional
Learn to
guitar
burn.
lessons that all my friends had to have.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I heard about Bangalore Choir, I said, I want to hear what he's up to. And I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed your voice as well.
Thank you.
It's one of those records, unfortunately, that came out at the time, 1991, where it doesn't really matter what you made. It was probably going to get lost. A lot of bands were getting signed. Max Norman producing. Songs co-written by John Bon Jovi and Aldo Nova. Uh, Obviously, great production, great songs, and you still just can't get out of that time.
I even had Howard Kaufman managing me, and Irving Azoff owned Giant Records. I mean, you got Whitesnake's management, you got Stevie Nicks. I'm at Stevie's house demoing those tunes. Her personal assistant walked me into, Kaufman, and I've got the heaviest hitters on the universe that are breaking, the Eagles and Led Zeppelin. I mean, you can't get any better than that. That's rock royalty. So I'm thinking, okay. And the cool thing about Bangalore is I had the momentum. And I think we had a different guitar player, Joey Tafoya,
Mhm.
and it wasn't working out. And John Kirk said, well, I play in Razormaid with this guy, Kurt Mitchell. You got to hear this kid play. I went over to the apartment, and he was set up with all these stacks and a bunch of wine, and just was just like, wow, what planet starship have you come from? And just looking at me, and he literally said, he had this old mutt Strat. He goes, it's just a piece of wood with 6 metal strings, and threw it across the floor and jumped on it like a skateboard and skated across the carpet. And I looked at him like, this guy's insane, but I got to have him. He's a genius musician. And that record, after 9 gigs, we were offered in LA, that's about a year of shows. So every record company was knocking on our door. So we signed up. And like you said, the weird thing about Bangalore Choir was when I was called in, we did some lynch mob shows and stuff with other bands that were kind of, at that level. And when they called me in one day and said, it's over, we're dropping the band, I was like, well, what? We were talking about doing the Slip of the Tongue tour with Whitesnake. And that was a big deal.
Yes.
And they said, no, it's over, man. Rock and roll's dead. Go home, get a day job, quit. And I'm like, no. And this is a nightmare. What are you saying? Just 2 months ago, we had the most added to radio with Loaded Gun. Well, it's over. We're just going to take the loss, get out of here. Had I known that the album was really doing well in the UK and Europe, I would have schlepped and got the band over to tour and took whatever gig we could get, because I played Firefest in a few gigs with some of the original lineup, and they were saying, where have you been? This is my favorite album of that time. It's huge here. It was on the radio all day. And I was told rock was dead. I didn't know, because grunge kind of leaked like a year or two later into Europe. So it had already actually died in America while it was growing over here.
Right. Yeah. Different. Things spread differently. It's one of those things where, and you had some bands that just got signed. They had a look. They weren't so good. But then you had these other bands like yours that were great bands, but just couldn't get out of that shuffle. And it's got to make you think, what do I have to do? I have this great thing with Accept. I rode the momentum into this. I had all the people behind it. And now you're telling me rock is dead, just as I'm finally breaking through.
You can't explain the depression, the darkness, the anger, it's just, that's when you start hitting the chemicals and start going, you get really self-destructive, because it's not fair, but there's nothing fair about rock and roll. It's a full contact sport. I mean, if you're not willing to take the Tyson punches, then you're in the wrong game.
Sure.
And it's that way today. It never changed, Music is, you can go back to Motown, those cats, you get what they call them, the Wrecking Crew, for $50 a week. They're writing, #1 singles all day long for $50 a week. And those cats are the best players in the world.
I was to say, greatest musicians ever, James Jamerson, all these guys, just so incredible and barely getting paid.
Yeah, and they're starving to death. So sitting in a basement in Detroit at Motown, recording hit after hit. But that's one of those things about. And another thing too that I'm aware of as a singer, and I know I can sing, but there's a thing called the it factor, and that could play a role in it. A lot of people don't realize that you can be really great at your trade, but there's certain little nuances in personality, looks, moves, character that add and embellish that, and that's the it factor. I may not have enough of that, and that's a real struggle. Okay, as an artist, you don't want to be looked over, but you see another guy that really can't sing, but there's something special about him that everybody's it's like a magnet, right? And you fight with that as well. It's like, well, what has he got that I ain't got? And then you see.
I think grunge showed that. We talked about grunge, but I think there was some very talented people, but there was also personalities, and a lot of those personalities didn't survive. But they were sort of manufactured, and it is that it factor.
I believed when it hit as big as it did that it was about a 3 or 4 year lifespan. I knew it wasn't something, unless you're like Cantrell and guys like that, that really have something special, to me. And he's still writing great songs, but factually is most of those great singers are dead. I think Pearl Jam and the Chili Peppers are really the only true survivors, and the Foo Fighters, some of that crowd, have evolved, and they write great stuff.
Yeah, you can do revival of the hard rock bands and have all these lead singers, a lot of them, but with the grunge scene, you couldn't do that. They're not here.
They're gone. So it's a cultural thing, heroin and the whole let's anti-blonde lead singer David Lee Roth look, which it committed its own self-suicide. It cut its own head off. The snake was been so overdone in LA since like 82. It was about time for like the Beatles to come over again, and change. It happened. Look what happened to Elvis when the Beatles, were making fun of him shaking his hips. Those guys, he couldn't get arrested. He had to go to Vegas and do residencies. So, you like I said, you just got to be able to. You just write songs and you keep fighting and pushing forward. That's all you can do. And
you never gave up because you became a journeyman performer. You were the singer for hire. Bonfire and solo albums and other people's records, and you've worked with some amazing people, but you didn't give up. And maybe there wasn't a breakthrough project in the States per se, but I say it on this show all the time, music is in a different place, and now just by talking about it, people can get your music easily. It used to be, if your record came out on a label in another country, it might be expensive to order, it might be hard to find. Now it's as easy as being at your fingertips. And if people want new music, it's easy to get. And you have a good product. I listened to the album, and like I said, it is available now, Blacklist Utopia. On the show, I've made it a habit of not talking too much about politics or pandemic. I feel like it's time to give people some music. They don't tune in to hear my opinion. They want an escape. But this is a heavy record, and this is a record that is definitely recorded during heavy times, pandemic times. You're in Italy, a country that had a full lockdown.
30 minutes from my house, the explosion.
And it's amazing.
I literally was in the studio in that village where that guy had been in China and came to a meeting, and 200 people were infected. The next day, I was on my way, and the engineer said, "Don't come." The city shut down, and I thought it was a terrorist attack. And I had just finished Cacophony of Souls, which was to be released March 13th of 2020.
Right.
And that weekend, of course, was when they just closed Italy down. And talk about bad luck. You say, grunge, and then now you walk into a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So writing Blacklist Utopia was my saving grace. Our bassist, Malte Burkert, he's a great looking guy, great style. He's a Megadeth guy. He comes from Metallica. He's a few years younger. I never knew he was a songwriter, really. He's just a really great player on stage, got the look and the image. And he called me up because our guitar player, Andy, was doing a solo record and said, what are we going to do? I said, I don't know. I got to write. He said, well, I got a bunch of songs. And he started sending me ideas, like Down to the Core, Utopia. And I went, God, this guy can write music. And it just fell out of my hands. And with what was going on, watching the world basically shut down. I mean, it's there lyrically. I mean, it's all subjective. It's not one direct opinion what I'm doing,
I
but you
think for
can't.
sure. Yeah, I think what you're saying absolutely. Yes, there's heavy topics, but if you're just a fan of music, you're not being pushed down with it. You can think
No,
what you want, but you can also just enjoy the songs too.
yeah. There's great riffs. There's great harmonies. There's lots of melody. It's dark. It's light. I mean, it's got all the colors of a rock and roll album. And rock and roll has always been kind of defiant, anyways. Opinionated. I mean, that's why what makes it special. But what I fear is, because of everything being at home and no shows, is that the magic of rock and roll in your head and in your heart has been kind of sucked out of us. It's been kind of put aside. I don't know how to explain it, and I see it with a lot of people where they're delving into their iPhones about the next problem and their shots and all this stuff. The artistry and that release that you got before all this, it's kind of been stolen, and I that hurts me. I see a lot of people walking away from bands. I'm not getting injected. I'm not touring. I'm done. Les Paul's hanging on the wall. Done.
Yeah.
Not me.
Well, you have that, and then you have other people who are it's obviously it's such a divided world, but you have people who are fearful to travel,
Yeah.
but then some members of the band, we got to get out there, and
Yep.
so with this strange division, it is being harder on bands, and
Yeah.
then you get a lot of bands who go out, and some people do get sick,
Yeah.
and some pass away, and so it gets complicated. And like you said, sort of the magic of rock and roll has been dwindling a little bit. I mean, the old days we learned out of a magazine, and you can have an image and a character. Now with the internet, everything's news in 1 second, or
Yeah.
filmed on your
Yeah. It's so lightning fast. I mean, you talked about it earlier. The young cats, like in Europe, it's a loyalty like Udo. I mean, he has a legion, an army of fans, and the reason Udo does is because he's one of them.
Mhm.
The reason Lemmy had that, he's one of them, and that's in that genre. You know what I mean? There's if you're too pretty, it's kind of a problem, but if you're a street guy, you're one of them. They're not good. They're going to die with their little man cave of UDO and Lemmy things, and Sabbath and all that stuff, if you follow what I'm saying. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember the first time I heard some of my favorite songs and that magic. And if I put that record on, it brings me back to that moment.
Yeah, and it's hard to capture that moment now. I find myself, and I enjoy your record, and I know some of the tracks, but we listen to music now. It's not like when we held the CD and we knew the names of all the songs. I now know music's different though. I don't. It used to be our A side and our B side. Now I know the records as full records, especially because, and I listen to a lot of new music doing this show, and I consider myself fortunate to be able to hear that, because a lot of it I feel like I might have missed, and it's great to share that with people because they can realize, hey, music's not done. There's fresh music that you put your headphones on and you can escape with this record. And like you said, the riffs and the hooks are there. And try to, for younger people, discover new music, because there's some young people who are looking back and going, wow, I missed some of the greatest times. Well, there is music now. You just have to look a little bit more carefully to find it.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that they're hearing now, they're putting their twist to it, but we all stole from those guys back what we were talking about, like the hit writers. I mean, there's only so many notes on this guitar neck or on a piano. It's what you do with it. It's the attitude behind the track. And then it goes back to that it factor. Certain songs just touch people in the masses. It's a really cool phenomenon to me, and they're a timeless song.
Yeah, which is
Or
becoming harder to find. But there
yeah,
are some that it's hard to get new ones to join to the ones that are already there.
yeah. I mean, and we're living in a non-timeless environment in the world, so there's nothing such as timeless. It's nowness, or it's tomorrowness. There's no history involved in it, but there are some really great bands out there. I'm a fan of like the Rival Sons. I think that they combined a lot of that nasty rock and roll LA thing in kind of a modern thing. And then I like Arch Enemy. I mean, I like a lot of different stuff. I like aggressive music. I love Tom Petty. And the older I get, the more I admire what he actually did musically. I mean, it blows my mind that I was so naive to the genius of his music. He didn't do anything really new. He was doing stuff from the Byrds that had been done a million times, Crosby's music, but his interpretation of it, I mean, you could say more in 3 words than I say in 10. He could say, won't back down, and things like that. I'm learning as a songwriter as I go.
It's
Are
funny
you?
how time does that. Yeah, the great ones find their way into our lives. We might have missed a few, or maybe they were just
Yeah,
so popular and we only
yeah,
knew the hits. But then
yeah.
we dig deep and we realize, uh,
You get to Wildflowers, and his birthday was a few days ago, and it was an accidental overdose. And I mean, the guy finished a 40-day tour with a broken hip, and they were literally driving him on an electric golf cart to the stage, and he was eating a handful of Percocets to get through a gig. And the band were like, Tom, we can just go home. And he goes, nah, man, we're doing it. And every night he'd play, he'd break that hip a little more. And when he got home, he had scheduled, I'd read that, for the tour Campbell was talking about. And he's, of course, in a room working on a song and probably forgot what he had taken and taken too much and dropped dead in the studio. Terrible. But
yeah,
the music itself is timeless. And like you said, the oversaturation of hearing those, Damn the Torpedo songs a million times when we were young, then you start realizing what he was as an artist, and he's gone. It's like Prince,
hmm
people like that. I mean, I have a broad spectrum of people that I listen to. I'm a big Steely Dan fan. I mean, the older I get, oh my God, what were these guys tripping on? I mean, this music is insane. But you want to know kind of what else I've done through the pandemic? I mean, I've got some
yeah.
other things that. Thank you. I got lucky, but I go to Bulgaria and sing for a group called John Steele, and they're kind of a progressive metal thing. And I did their new album, Distorted Reality, and then I was doing a few demo. I was getting cool calls like, hey, everybody's bored sitting at home. I need to work. So I would get offered Taz Taylor, Christian Bettendorf, Christian Tola, all these guys that I know would say, I got 3 or 4 songs for you, track them. And they were paying me to do it. I said, yeah, because it kept my voice in shape and blah, blah, blah. One thing that came out of all this was my manager introduced me to Jimmy Waldo, who actually collaborated on Blacklist Utopia on a few tracks. And he was writing with a guy named Steve Rosen. And Steve Rosen, you may know from Rolling Stone magazine and I think Guitar World. And on YouTube, you can find him. He's interviewing Eddie, he's interviewing Vai and Satriani, all these guys. Well, he kind of made a backdoor deal. One of these days, I'm going to do a record and you're going to play on it. Agreed? Yeah, we'll do it, dude. Blah, blah, blah. Well, I get a phone call from Jimmy saying, hey, Steve and I are going to do this record. Do you want to write the lyrics and sing on it? I said, sure. Unbeknownst to me, Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and Kane Roberts and Bumblefoot and all these cats are playing guitars to these scratch tracks. And I just heard the masters the other day, and I wrote 9 of these songs. So I'm in the company of kings.
Absolutely.
I'm stoked about that. And then on top of that, we talked about my kickoff in my career. Except I get an email from Herman Frank,
hmm
and I've never personally met Herman. I mean, we were in the same band, but we missed each other by inches, right? Inches of a clean getaway, festivals and all kinds of stuff. And he calls me up and he says, hey, man, I'm a big fan of your voice. We've never really met. Would you be interested in writing some stuff, see if it works? So we formed a band called Iron Allies. We've got Donnie Von Stavern from Riot on bass. We got Francesco Giovino on drums. Got about 22 tracks recorded right now. Super heavy, traditional metal. It's got the Accept, it's got Riot, it's got David Reece, it's got Victory, it's got all those ingredients in the cooking pot. And I'm really stoked about that too. So I've been busy, man.
Yeah, and that's what like I was saying. That's your career. You're not going to just sit down and go, "Well, I'm going to wait for this one to take off." You're going to work and let people hear your voice, which is the gift that you share with people. And it's fortunate that some of these guys like Jimmy Waldo, who was known for Alcatraz, and then all of a sudden the things start rolling with these amazing guitar players. And
it's nuts. It's nuts. I mean, I listen to the masters and right away who it is. It's like, oh, Joe's playing on that song. Oh God, what has he done? And then you hear Bumblefoot and go, oh man, that guy is a sick bastard, And Herman played a track on one of the tracks. I invited him to do that because we were kind of doing that at the same time. And but one thing that's can be detrimental is I did so many projects. I left music for about 9 years. I went to Tennessee, bought a farm, had a construction company, started a family. Of course, it blew up in my face because I'm a rock singer. It didn't work out. I was away for 9 years, and I literally didn't have it. I ended up in Montana ranching, being a cowboy, and I didn't even have a computer. So I traded a hunting dog for one, and the guy told me how to turn it on and what MySpace was. I didn't even know any of this stuff. So I set up a page, and as soon as I come back, everybody's like, where have you been? And I had like 4 or 5 offers that week to come join bands or sing on records. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I've gained about 50 pounds. I shaved my head. I haven't done this. I couldn't sing because I hadn't sang. And I ended up going to Sweden and singing on a band called Gypsy Rose with a guy named Martin Kronlund. And from there, it just kind of exploded with all these projects. And my dream was, let's go out and tour. But I didn't know that music had changed. There was, internet sharing and all this stuff, and clubs that were dying. It wasn't like it was before.
Yeah.
So I ran into a wall hoping that every project I did would be something that would tour. And it kind of hurt me because it was kind of like Reece is on that now. And I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I did Universal Language and a few records after that. And then I was going to retire after 5 years from being back. I literally was done. I said, I'll give it 5 years. And Hans Ziller contacted me through Michael Voss and asked me to do some shows. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Well, no, I've got a plane ticket and 10 shows. Can you come over? I went over and did it, went home to Montana, called me up 2 weeks later. I got 10 more. And that's where I met my wife and the whole thing. We'd already met, but we got to be together. And that's where it kind of, exploded. And then, you get the ugly managers involved and everything. So the band just frizzles and I'm out. And I'm not going to do the band thing anymore. I'm done with bands because there's no truth to democracy in a rock and roll band. I don't care who you are. There's always one guy who's doing everything. So I just wanted to kind of do it on my own, and I've been doing that. And then all of a sudden COVID hit and I get sucked back in, but these are projects that I could actually go, I'm going to make a band out of this, I'm going to play live with this. And this isn't just me making a couple $1,000 to sing on a record. And that's another thing about my voice is that when you do all those albums, if you notice back in the mid 2000s, a lot of bands were trying to copy Whitesnake to death.
Right.
And I can sing the covered ill stuff, or I used to be able to, like his younger days, but there's always a Hammond in there and a guitar player and blah, blah, blah. So a lot of that stuff got redundant. And I was going, you know what? I got to do something fresh, get away from this basic 4/4 blues rock thing and start writing some deep, heavy stuff again. Because my manager said, dude, eat the heat and the heavy songs on Bangalore. That's who you are. Stop fucking around with this Whitesnake stuff and be Reece. And he was right. So that's why you're hearing the heavier side of me now again.
Yes, and I think that does, and I think that it definitely shows your voice and appeals to an audience that I think would be interested in it. It's funny that you're saying that because I think over the years, I bet you there's a lot of bands who had to change their singer and you were one of the names that was in consideration. I'm sure it was like, okay, we know he can sing. He's got a name. Let's plug him in.
We'll sell a couple thousand records with Dave on it, which they did. I was up for Judas Priest. I mean, I was in Tennessee, and I hadn't fully retired yet because I had obligations before I decided to retire. I'm on the phone with Jane Andrews every 2 days. I'm in contention with Ralph Sheepers and Tim Owens. And it came down to like 3 or 4 guys, and I was one of those guys. And in those days, I had done Circle of Silence and some really heavy, intense Sabbathy kind of stuff. And Glenn Tipton went, that guy's got it. Let's get him over to England. Never came into fruition, but I was still the guy people were thinking about. And they, talk bad about me. And they said, well, he was a problem here. And yeah, I used to drink too much, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, call Dave. We can sell a couple thousand units, which if you look behind me, that's a gold album from the old days. Mm-hmm. If you didn't do that, you were done. But now you can do 2,000 or 3,000 albums and you've got a great successful record.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that it makes sense because I knew that there would be people, you plug into the formula. We need somebody new. Let's do this. But I like what and listen, if the future is still going, I'm sure there's still people out there going, have you listened to David's new music? This might be the guy that we should plug into.
I did a synth metal thing the other night. I've never done synth metal, like, programs and stuff.
Right.
This cat from Australia contacted me and asked me to sing on it. And I'd be like, okay. And I put a Flash Gordon kind of Queen vocal line in it. And he loved it. And I'd never done that before. It was fun. And I got another one to do next Tuesday for this guy. And I don't know what's going to become of it. But I'm still getting those calls. And it's nice because I got a family to feed.
Yeah.
And I lost, 40 shows last year. And this year I've lost, all November and October are gone. I was trying to promote this album, Blacklist Utopia. And I got to give a plug to the guys in Blacklist Utopia. I mean, Malta wrote a lot of the music on this. And then Andy kind of got jealous. Like he was concentrating on his solo album. And he said, hey, what are you guys doing? I'd like to write some stuff with you guys. So he contributed with like 3 or 4 songs. But Andy mixed it, produced it. And his guitar playing is so criminally underrated. Listen to Andy Sissimil play guitar and his production. And we had it separately mastered by Mats Fleischman, who's a genius. So a lot of guys now are mixing and mastering on their laptop at home. And you can really hear that on an album. That's another thing with music. It all kind of sounds like a cereal, I don't know what it is. This is like McDonald's or something. But I like to take my records and say, have a mastering lab say, tweak this, tweak that, tweak this, and really have separate ears. So that's where these solo albums, I think, are really stand out for me because the production team is so good. And the players, I've known Andy for 35 years.
Wow.
I met him when I was in Accept. He was in UDO doing Mean Machine. Mm-hmm. And I can say again about Udo, even though I replaced him, I used to be nervous around him at the studio. He'd come over and invite me for drinks at the pub and we'd just hang out. And he's still that way to me today. I know his son who plays in the band. I knew him when he was a baby. Right. So we're talking 30 some plus years of friendship.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then your label out there, El Puerto Records.
El Puerto.
Yeah, which is great that you have, behind it, and you've got some good marketing behind it as well. Which
they're great. They're great. God, look at them. I mean, I'm talking to you, and you got a great podcast. I mean,
thank you.
I mean, Dustin told me you got to talk to this guy. I mean, he was like, I can get you on. I'm like, hell yeah. So I looked you up and went, wow, this cat talks to a lot of some heavy cats.
I'm fortunate to have some good people. Yeah.
Yeah, man, you got a great side, dude. And I was like, yeah, man. And Dustin goes, you're on 11:30. I'm in.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you're able to join me. And I do this because I want to spread the word of new music to people, especially stuff they might miss. People on my show, yes, there's George Lynch and Stephen Pearcy, but the people that you don't hear from every day, and then there's the casual person goes, well, wow, I love to Eat the Heat. I like Bangalore. I want to hear what else there is. And so this is a good chance.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You got George, and you got, those guys are like, I've known those guys since 80,
Yeah.
I mean, brilliant. I mean, it's part of my legacy. You know, I saw Rat with Jakey playing guitar.
Wow,
You know, I
yeah,
mean,
very
I saw
beautiful.
I saw Motley Crue's first gig at the Whiskey. So, you know,
A lot of history. Yeah, and
yeah,
it's great to be able to talk to that, and with these things, you really get to connect to a person. When you read an interview in a magazine, I don't think you got an idea of who the person is, and if you could come across as a jerk, you know, if you.
yeah,
But when you get to talk to somebody and see what they're like and hear their story, it does create an interest, and I think that
yeah. You
people
know
enjoy
what?
it.
There's no need for there's room for the flamboyant guys. You know, but that was kind of the '80s thing. You know, Roth was the king of it. The
Sure,
one-liners. Freddie Mercury was, glamorous and a genius. The way they presented themselves, you're never going to get close to that level of coolness. And then you got, I just think that if you are down to earth but cool about it, because I can sit and talk to a cowboy and go, man, that dude looks cool. He's got the hat. He's got the life he wants to live. He's got his vision of how the world should be and how he takes care of himself and his animals and his wife and kids. And it's one thing that I say, man, respect. The guy's he's like a rock star in his own way. And then I meet an interviewer, a guy that's knowledgeable about music and actually knows my work, and says, dude, good album. Keep punching the label. And because if without all these little ingredients, what I'm doing does not matter.
sure.
And I'm thankful for that. And if you become jaded about it, people don't. I think the society we live, they can smell a jaded person that quick.
I think so too, and you have to adapt. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that shows that you're doing it. That it's
yeah,
it's a new way to sell a record. You never thought
yeah.
you'd be in Italy talking to Las Vegas, so that millions of people around the world have access to this.
It's fabulous. I mean, I hated it at first, but it's a necessary evil in some ways. Uh, I mean, I like to have a dinner with my friends without everybody glued to their iPhone or whatever you
Sure.
call it. I want to look in your face and talk to you, not the glow from the screen. But I can talk to you in the United States. It's what, 1 o'clock in the morning here? It's midnight here in Italy. And what is it there? Like,
4,
yeah, I mean, it's
3 o'clock.
cool, isn't it?
I
Yeah,
I,
remember,
I think it's great.
yeah, man. And it's live. And we got, in the old days, we were faxing each other, you
Right.
know, and we were Xeroxing and look what we do now. I mean, can you imagine 10 years from now? I could be a hologram. I could be like Star Trek sitting in your studio, hanging out with you.
Absolutely. I mean, who knows what's there? There's good and bad. There's a lot
Yeah,
of people who do this, and the interview is like, "You were in this band. What's that like?" And that's the best question they have. And so you have to have some substance, do some research,
yeah,
listen to the product. I've been
yeah,
reading people's books. People are writing books during these times. Great stuff that I might have missed. And if I'm honest about it, people go, you know what? He recommended this. Let me try that. And so
yeah,
hopefully people will give Blacklist Utopia a listen.
yeah,
It's available everywhere. It's easy to find. You can get
yeah.
physical copies if you want to do that. If you're a streaming person, it's available there. And we'll turn the world on to some new heavy music. And David, I hope you come back when the next project, because I know there'll be a next project. You stay busy.
Yeah, you gotta get Herman and I on, and Donnie and Francesco, and kind of put us
Great.
all in the rock and roll Hollywood squares, and we can tell you how this came
Believe
into
me,
fruition.
I love it. I had Tommy Skio's new band from Tesla.
Nice.
I had the whole band. We had at one point there's 6 of us. It looked like the Brady Bunch in our square. But I
And you're
think
in the middle pointing up, right, to the family,
yes,
right? Okay.
but it really does create a thing when everyone can talk about it together. So I look forward to talking to you more, and I wish you good success with this record.
And I as well. Thank you so much, and thank
Thank
you
you,
for your
David.
viewers. And we'll talk again soon. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.